First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Galatians, the first chapter. And in dealing with the book of Galatians, it's important as well to understand the context, usually behind the letters or writings that the Apostle Paul wrote to the various churches, because most of the time there was something going on, which he would mention or address in his letters. And so, back in the book of Acts, right, I believe around maybe the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th chapters or so, remember that during Paul's first missionary journey, he traveled, right, following this the red arrow, right, traveled through the different regions, building up and establishing, the believers in these different areas, right, these churches here. So you see here, you have one main one here in Antioch in Galatia, Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, and they taught in these places, right? They preached the gospel of Yahweh Shai, this being Paul and Barnabas, since Mark had left them. So they preached the gospel of Yahweh Shai in these different areas. And on their way back, they, exhorted the brethren to continue in what they had preached. And there was a key importance to what they had preached, which was that salvation and righteousness would come through believing and having faith in Yahweh Shai. And so the overall concept, right, of the book of Galatians here is that the Apostle Paul is re-emphasizing to them the things he taught them, that righteousness and salvation, remission of sins, is not going to come by way of the laws, right? It's not going to come by way of circumcision, and it's not going to come by way of keeping the Mosaic laws, because that is not what, we can't do that perfectly, but rather through faith in Yahweh Shai, which he stresses. And the reason he stressed this is because at this time, around this time, you had Israelites, right, that were going to these different areas as well, and they were, kind of like undoing what Paul was doing here by misleading, through the pushing of the circumcision and the Mosaic laws, these new believers, right? These new believers that were Israelites that didn't know they were Israelites, and they were newly coming into the faith. And so they were troubling them, as the Apostle Paul mentions. Now, when you actually go to, let's pull this up real quick, there's an example of this, because it wasn't just in Galatia, but when you read in the book of Acts, the 15th chapter, the first few verses, that same, doctrine that was being pushed, they brought that to Antioch, where Paul and Barnabas were. And he went back and forth with them, which led to the whole council at Jerusalem. And, when you look into it, some sources say that it's likely that the book of Galatians was written before the council, as, Paul doesn't explicitly mention, right, the decree that was made, basically the go-ahead, or not the go-ahead, but the decree that was given at the council, which would have been something that, had that been the case, that he was writing this letter post that council, he would have definitely included that in there, right? That, look, shut all that down. It's already, the apostles have already, given the decree that this is what the case is. But anyway, in Acts 15, it says here, and certain men which came down from Judea taught the brethren and said, except ye be circumcised after the manner of Moses, ye cannot be saved. When therefore Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation with them, so they were going back and forth with them, and this wasn't like a light or small back and forth, because this was a matter of salvation, and by pushing something like this, you could destroy the faith of, say somebody that's just newly coming in. So they took this very seriously. So when this, became such a big deal, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain other of them should go up to Jerusalem onto the apostles and elders about this question. So um, we've already gone through the book of Acts, the 15th chapter. You can watch that if you want the whole chapter, but just wanted to get the point here that you had men going around that were pushing this teaching that you can't be saved except you're circumcised, or you basically have to keep these laws of Moses. In fact, before going back to Galatians, when we go down a bit, you'll see here in the fifth verse, it says here, when this issue came up and it was mentioned at Jerusalem, but there rose up certain of the sect of the Pharisees, which believed, saying that it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. See, so you likely had certain men that were going around with that doctrine, or pushing that in mind, and likely went to that area, those areas where Paul had already been. And so when Paul got word of that, he wrote this letter to the churches that were there in Galatia concerning the importance of faith. Okay, because you had Israelites in Galatia, right, in those churches that were giving heed to this I guess doctrine that was being pushed. So let's read a little bit here. Epistle of the to the Galatians. And I'm going to jump around a bit just to, get the main points here, but then we'll go into the book of Galatians. So it says the epistle to the Galatians is the 9th book of the New Testament of the Christian Bible, and the 4th of the Pauline epistles in traditional arrangement. Okay, this is just giving some background on it. Let's jump down here. Well, actually, let me read a little bit. It is a letter from Apostle, or Paul the Apostle, to a number of early Christian communities in Galatia. Scholars have suggested that this is either the Roman province of Galatia in southern Anatolia, which is Anatolia is another name for Asia Minor. I don't know if it'll pop up here. Yeah. Or a large region defined by Galatians, an ethnic group of Celtic people in central Anatolia. The letter was originally written in Koine Greek and later translated into other languages. In this letter, Paul is principally concerned with the controversy surrounding Gentile Christians. And when it says Gentile Christians here, in actuality, these were actually Israelites that majority of them didn't know, all right, when they were called Greeks, they didn't know that they were Israelites, right? And they were living after the customs of the heathen, and they were now being called back to the fold, but starting first with the belief in Yahushua. It says here, and the Mosaic law during the apostolic age. Paul argues that the Gentile Galatians do not need to adhere to the tenets of the Mosaic law, particularly religious male circumcision, by contextualizing the role of the law in light of the revelation of Hamashiach. So Paul was putting everything in perspective to say, look, the law was there, but this is the purpose and significance of it. It doesn't hold more weight than the faith in Yahushua. Okay. And on top of that, you couldn't keep it perfectly even if you tried. Those that are telling you that you have to keep this, they themselves couldn't keep it perfectly. And if you can't keep it perfectly and you want to be under the law, then you don't have a way to salvation. But through Yahushua, you don't have to keep the laws perfectly. But if you have that perfect faith in Yahushua, it'll be counted onto you as righteousness, and that'll be your way or avenue to be justified. And that's what he was pushing, so that they wouldn't abandon or turn from the faith in Yahushua and rather think that they had to prioritize circumcision or the laws of Moses above the faith in Yahushua. Because some of them will start to think that maybe faith in the Lord isn't enough, right? If I'm not circumcised, or if I'm not doing this, or if I'm not doing that. Cool. Yeah. All right. So now let's go to the book of Galatians. This is Galatians chapter 1, verse 1. Paul, an apostle, not of men, neither by man, but by Yahushua HaMashiach, and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brethren which are with me, unto the churches of Galatia. Grace be to you, and peace from God the Father, and from our Lord Yahushua HaMashiach, who gave himself for our sins, that he might deliver us from this present evil world. Right, because prior to Yahushua coming on the scene, even in prophecy, it was, Israel was likened onto being in darkness, right? Those that walked in darkness have seen a great light. So the way that we were living, though, you had certain forms of guidance and keeping the laws here and there wasn't really an avenue or a way for us to gain salvation. All right, because we weren't going to keep the laws perfectly. So we were bound under sin in this evil world, as that is what was promoted. But by Yahushua coming on the scene and being that sacrifice, we now had a way, an entrance, a door, okay, to be delivered from the old way that we were living, being a part of the world. So according to the will of God and our Father, because the Most High determined this, and that's why he sent Yahushua to come and fulfill this very important and crucial task. To whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. I marvel. So now, after the greeting, Paul is now getting into, the point of his letter here. So as he says, I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you into the grace of Hamashiach onto another gospel. Because Paul had heard that this basically, you had certain believers that were, drifting away from the faith and pushing more towards, being swayed towards that circumcision and the law of Moses, like above the faith of the Lord. And he's saying, look, I was just there, right? Remember, this is after his first missionary journey, in which he went to these different areas. And he's like, yo, that's why he said so soon. I was just there teaching and exhorting you, and already ye are turning away from him that called you into the grace of Yahushua onto another gospel, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you. So really, it's not even another gospel. It's just men that are troubling you or using deceit to try and subvert your faith, right? And the word trouble goes into like to agitate. Let's read some the synonyms for that word. Tarasso, it says here to agitate, trouble, to cause one inward commotion, to take away his calmness of mind. So as to where they were joyous, right, and glad, now they would have this conflict, right, this internal conflict. Damn, am I really doing his faith in Yahushua enough? Like, and what that does is that creates doubt, and that weakens your faith. So it's almost pulling you away from the one way you need to be going in. And in the look at that. 4, to trouble, to strike one's spirit with fear and dread. Because now they knew about, salvation. They knew who they were. But how do you get it? If you're now being told you cannot be saved except you get circumcised and you keep these laws here and here and there and here and here. To perplex the mind of one by suggesting scruples or doubts. So these men were troubling them and would pervert the gospel of Hamashiach. See, because now they're telling you, no, it's not just faith. You have to do this and you have to do that and you have to do this. But the basis of the gospel of Yahushua it is on faith in Yahushua. It's salvation through faith in Yahushua. Okay, and obviously that comes with actions and deeds you would do and take, but it starts with the faith, you believing in Yahushua. But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. So he's saying here, listen up and listen good. All right. If we came back and started teaching you something else, let us be cursed. If an angel from heaven came down or anybody came and tried to teach you something other than what we have preached to you originally, let them be cursed. Do not listen to them. As we said before, so say I now again. If any man preach any other gospel unto you than that ye have received, let him be accursed. If they come and they're teaching something that is not what we taught you before, let them be accursed. Do not give heed to that. For do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I yet please men, I should not be the servant of Hamashiach. And here Paul is saying, I don't do this work in regard for what men would think of me. That's why he's saying, do I now persuade men or God? Right? I'm here to do the work of the Lord, not to seek the approval of men, as he says, or do I seek to please men? For if I yet pleased men, so if that was the my purpose here was to be a man pleaser, then I should not be the servant of Hamashiach, because then I would be doing the things that are pleasing to men rather than truly serving Yahushai. Seeing as the Most High is not a respecter of persons, neither is Yahushai. But I certify you, brethren. It says here, Paul defends his ministry. Yep. But I certify you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man. For I neither, so basically saying, look, this gospel came from heaven, right? This isn't something that, I was taught by another man or anything. No, this came directly from the Lord. For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Yahushua HaMashiach. So the Lord opened up Paul's mind and revealed the full understanding, okay, of this gospel to him. And that's why he's saying, I didn't go anywhere to get taught this. The Lord revealed it to me. For that's why he was speaking so confidently and telling them, if anybody teaches you anything else, let them be accursed. For ye have heard of my conversation in time past. Conversation there going into his way of life, how he used to live before. You can see in the Greek there, anastrophe, manner of life, conduct, behavior, or deportment. So you have heard of how I used to live in times past in the Jews' religion. And when you go into that word religion, it goes into the ways that you're raised up, you're brought up in, the laws, the traditions, right? The Jewish faith and worship, religion of the Jews, Judaism. So that included even the traditions, right? And he's saying how he was in that, how he was living in that in the past, how that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God and wasted it. And, you read the book of Acts, it's in there, how he consented to Stephen's death, right? How he even requested letters to Damascus to go and arrest believers, whether man or woman, and bring them bound to be thrown in prison. And profited in the Jews' religion above many my equals in mine own nation. And the word profited meaning like he exceeded. Prokopto, to beat forward, metaphor to promote forward further, right? Metaphor for point 2, to increase, make progress, to advance. So he was saying, look, of all my peers, right, of all, as it says, mine equals in mine own nation, he was like, that's why he said a Pharisee of Pharisees, right? He was far exceeded. He was heavily into it. Being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers. But so he did that out of ignorance because he was really doing it out of zeal. But even Paul at one time had a zeal, but not according to knowledge. So it says here, but when it pleased God who separated me from my mother's womb, right? So that's why he mentioned that Paul was a chosen vessel unto him. When Ananias was asking the Lord, well, this guy persecuted and is trying to persecute the church, and you want me to go and heal him? And he says he is go thy way, right? He's a chosen vessel. So the word separated, it says, to mark off from others by boundaries, to limit, to separate, in a good sense, to appoint, set apart for some purpose. So even though, in his early years, he was persecuting the church, he was still ordained from his mother's womb to play this role that he was now being a part in, and called me by his grace, right, i.e. his goodwill, to reveal his son in me, that I might preach him among the heathen. So he revealed Yahushua to Paul, and through Paul, he would reveal Yahushua to the Israelites that were living in the different regions that didn't know that they were Israelites, and some that knew they were Israelites but didn't know about the gospel of Yahushua. So that's why he says that I might preach him among the heathen, not for the native heathens, but for the Israelites that were living there amongst them. Immediately I conferred not with flesh and blood. So he didn't go and consult with anybody. Neither went I up to Jerusalem to them which were apostles before me, right? Peter, James, John. But I went into Arabia and returned again on to Damascus. Now, Paul doesn't expound here, right, why he went into Arabia or what he went to do there, whether he went and got some more revelations over there, who knows, right? But he says when the Lord, basically opened up his mind and he was converted, he went there and returned back to Damascus, which he spent about 3 years, okay, from the point he was converted before he first went, or he's going to say it actually, to Jerusalem. Verse 18, then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter and abode with him 15 days. But other of the apostles saw I none. And when he first went there, it tells you that in the book of Acts that the believers didn't believe that Paul was actually on their side. And it wasn't until Barnabas took him, and brought him to the apostles. And then, he dwelled with them for a period of time. But then eventually he got into it with some of the Grecians, and then they wanted to kill him. So then they had to send him back to Tarsus, back to his hometown. But obviously he wasn't sitting idle, because he stayed there until Barnabas went and called him, right, went and sought for him. And then they went on their first missionary, journey together. So as he says here, but other of the apostles saw I none, save James, the Lord's brother. Now the things which I write unto you, behold, before God I lie not. So this is his intro, right, into the meat of the message that he's trying to get across to the Galatians, right, or to the churches in Galatia. So as he's saying here, these are all true, right? I'm not lying, I'm not making this up. Afterwards, I came into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, which Cilicia is this part right here, right? Which this is where Tarsus, where Paul was from, is. So when he was there, he was preaching amongst them, right? And then all the way to Syria, where Antioch is, where he would frequently be. Verse 22, and was unknown by face unto the churches of Judea, which were in Hamashiach. So they heard, but they didn't know what Paul looked like. But they had heard only that he which persecuted us in times past now preacheth the faith which once he destroyed. So he had been converted, and they glorified God in me. And that was a big deal, because Paul was this wasn't a light persecution. He was heavily after them. So for somebody like that to do a 180 like that, it's something that strengthens your faith, if you're a believer. And that brings us to the end of the book of Galatians, the first chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.